Hello, I'm Cameo George, executive producer of American Experience, PBS's flagship and longest running history series. Thank you for joining us. Past Forward Conversations with American Experience is our monthly virtual conversation series with historians and experts where we discuss enduring themes explored in our films. Today's Past Forward conversation, celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, is inspired in part by our film, Jubilee Singers, Sacrifice and Glory, now available to stream in full on our website, americanexperience.org, and in the PBS video app. Jubilee Singers, Sacrifice and Glory tells the story of a group of formerly enslaved people who battled prejudice and oppression to sing their way into a nation's heart and save their school. When they started, they barely made enough money to cover their expenses, but by the end, they were performing for diplomats, presidents, and royalty. Our panelists today will discuss the grueling conditions the singers faced during their journey, the impact the group had in popularizing African American spirituals, the effect their success had on racism in America and beyond, and the Jubilee Singers' ongoing legacy today. This is meant to be an interactive conversation. As always, I invite you to write questions in the live chat, and we'll answer as many as possible during the discussion. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our corporate sponsors, Liberty Mutual Insurance and Consumer Cellular. I'd also like to acknowledge the Ford Foundation, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation, the Documentary Investment Group, PBS, our home station, GBH, and of course, viewers like you. Now it is my privilege to introduce our panel for this conversation. Paul Kwami is the current musical director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers and Mike Kerb Jubilee Singers Endowed Chair. Llewellyn Smith is the producer and director of our film, Jubilee Singers, Sacrifice and Glory. The conversation will be moderated by Lerone Martin, Associate Professor of Religion and Politics at Washington University in St. Louis, and the newly appointed faculty director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute at Stanford. Congratulations. Thank you again, and please enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Cameo, and I'm so excited to be here with Professor Kwami and Lou, and it's I'm really excited to get started about this wonderful film. So let's start with Professor Kwami. We're celebrating 150 years of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, and the group is still thriving today. So for those who are new to the Jubilee Singers, please tell us who the original Jubilee Singers were and how their modern group carries on their legacy and everything from their age to their background. Tell us who these folks were.
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. It's a very exciting time as we celebrate our 150th anniversary. This is exciting because we're talking about African Americans and African American music. The Fisk Jubilee Singers, of course, started traveling on October 6, 1871. But the question is, how did this ensemble come about? The Fisk School, which was established by the American Missionary Association with the purpose of providing free education, ran into financial challenges. And George White, who happened to be the treasurer of the school at that time and was also a music teacher, who had actually worked with several choral ensembles because of his personal interests, came up with the idea of training a group of young students at Fisk University. He believed that he could travel around the United States, having these young African-American students singing and raising money. The interesting thing is that he was a white person and was planning to travel with Black young children, some of who were about 13 years old. So what he did was that he originally planned and taught them to sing Western classical music. But in the process of training them, he and the students also collected and transformed the Negro spirituals. They changed them into art forms for the purpose of singing them in concerts. So on October 6, 1871, as I mentioned, he left Nashville with this group of young African-American students who traveled around the United States in 1871, something that no one had ever done. The administration at that time was not even in agreement because they thought it was just an experimental thing. But they ended up winning the hearts of many people around the country by singing these beautiful songs into the hearts of even their enemies, and were able to raise enough money to prevent the closure of Fisk University. It's a great thing that Fisk University and supporters around the world have continued to support the Fisk Jubilee Singers all of these years. And 150 years today, we continue to be among the many groups and individuals who continue to sing and preserve the Negro spirituals.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you for that. And so I'll turn to you, Lou. What made you interested in making this film about the origins of the Jubilee Singers?
Well, first, thanks for having me here and inviting me. And it's just an honor to be part of the celebration and also to be with Dr. Kwami again. Congratulations again on your Emmy.
Thank you.
I haven't seen Dr. Kwami in a long time, but when we were filming the Jubilee Singers, you were the director.
Right.
And we worked very closely with you to get the scenes that we needed of the singers. It was fantastic. It was a great experience. There's a writer, Jeffrey Ward, Andrew, I'm sorry, Jeffrey's his brother who works with Ken Burns. I'm sorry, yeah, Andrew Ward, who actually was working on a book, and he came to the American Experience and had an idea to develop it into a film. He was finishing the book, and we got excited. I got very excited about the possibility of doing this film for a couple of reasons. One, it's a story I had never heard. You know, I knew about the Jubilee Singers. I knew something about them. Somebody said, "Oh, they're the singers from Fisk, and they sing these spirituals, and the spirituals are lovely." And that's about as much as I knew. So to hear the story of how these young people coming out of slavery, very young people, as Dr. Kwame said, as young as 13, wind up on the road traveling, singing, preserving these spirituals, performing across the nation, performing in other countries, was just sort of a mind-blowing thing to begin to comprehend. So that was exciting to me. And the other thing was to have the opportunity to do a film where, as much as possible, the music itself could be prominent. And many people who are here may not have seen the film, but it was certainly an effort for us. It was one of our goals to have as much of the music in the film as we could bring into the story. And the third thing is personal. You know, this is music that, you know, exuded from my grandmother's church in Shelby, in Shelby, North Carolina. This is music that was very much a part of my mother's church. You know, when we in Boston, when she came to Boston, she brought it to us and into our home. And I learned so much more about music and songs that I never heard of. And as Dr. Kwame says, you know, this music, you can imagine that it sounded very differently when you only imagine, but it must have been different when you're talking about African-American people as slaves, singing this music, inventing this music as they are working, and singing it for themselves, not singing it to, for an audience that was not, that didn't know it, singing it for themselves to express their hope, their suffering, to just keep rhythm, to hold on to the spiritual promise that they believe would carry them forward. It must have sounded completely. These are people who are inventing this music without literacy, not writing it down. And it must have been amazing. And so in some ways, what the Jubilee Singers do is they translate this, you can call it translation, but they begin to bring it into a form that connects with, a larger audience in a larger world. So trying to capture or explore all that was very exciting. Was a very exciting thing.
So we're going to turn to a clip in just a second, but so we have a university in 1871, as Professor Kwami said, that is attempting to raise funds to help educate its student body. These young singers, young as 13 years old, are sent out to the world to sing and try to raise funds. So we want to take a clip from the documentary to talk a little bit about this very start of the Jubilee Singers tour, and then we'll come back after the clip to discuss a little bit more.
With the last $40 of the school's treasury in his pocket, White took his singers on the road.
Not one of us had an overcoat or wrap. Mr. White had an old gray shawl. Taking every cent he had, all his school treasury could spare, and all he could borrow, Mr. White started in God's strength October 6, 1871, with his little band of singers to sing the money out of the hearts and pockets of the people. Ella Shepherd.
White's plan was to lead his singers north to perform along the old Underground Railway, starting in Cincinnati and following the network of abolitionist homes and churches that had once relayed escaped slaves to Canada. For their repertoire, White chose European classical and popular songs, some composed by himself. At their debut in Cincinnati, the audience received them warmly enough, but donated less than $50. The next day, news reached the singers of the Great Fire in Chicago. They gave all their money to the relief fund and left town empty-handed. Night after night, it was the same story. Crowds loved their singing, but the collection plate said it all. $50 or $60, barely enough to cover expenses.
So Professor Kwami, after this clip, could you tell us just a little bit more about this reception that the Jubilee Singers received when they first began their fundraising tour?
Yes. Now, of course, it should not be surprising to us that when they started traveling in 1871, they were not well received in many, many places. It could be just because people did not believe in the intelligence of Black people at that time, or it could be just because people had no respect for them, which is probably one of the things I can say. But as they traveled, people simply ridiculed them. They got to a restaurant, for example, sat down to eat, and all of a sudden the students had quarreling between the husband and wife. The husband was angry because Black people had come into his restaurant and did not want them there. There was another instance where George White, the director, purchased first-class coach tickets for them to travel on a train. But they walked into the train, the conductor realized these were Black people and didn't allow them to sit in the first-class coach. In addition to all these, there were places where they were very hungry and people wouldn't give them places, food to eat. We also have to realize that they were out on a mission that was to raise funds for Fisk University. But people would go into the concert halls, listen to them sing, and walk out not giving money. There is, we have in our library a painting of someone who depicted them as apes singing, you know. But what I can say is these young students, even though they experienced those hardships during their travel, did not forget about their mission, which was to raise funds for the university. But that also leads me to say this, that I'm glad we are honoring them today. I'm glad we are talking about them because many people do not know who they were before becoming students at Fisk University. Ella Shepherd, for example, while she was a little girl, her mother had wanted to kill her, was on the way to drown her, actually, when an elder woman came across them and realized what was about to happen and stopped them from doing so. She said to Ella's mother to look up at the skies and that God had great things for her to do, that she would sing before kings and queens. And she actually became one of those who helped George White to gather and transform the Negro spirituals, you know. So I look at the stories of these young people. In fact, one of them, Thomas Ratlin, only remembered her mother when he was about 2 or 3 years old, kissing her goodbye because she was being sold into slavery. But those are the people who traveled. And I believe that the experiences they had before entering Fisk made them strong spiritually, so that as they traveled and ran into all these negative situations, they were able to win the hearts of people, even using the power of their music.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lou, did you want to add anything to that about helping us understand the conditions in which the Jubilee Singers found themselves as they began their tour?
I think that Dr. Kwami has described it very well. I mean, in some ways it's, and when you think about their response, I mean, you know, I think a little bit, the first, as he was talking, I was thinking about this, you may not connect to this thought, but I was thinking about Jackie Robinson, you know, it's like, these are young kids who are going out into a world that they don't know and a world that doesn't know them and disparages them and expects them to underperform and believes that they are failures and not worth their time. And so they have to face that, you know, as you said, they were sometimes singing and they were actually starving. They were being just despised and people were mocking them. And they still continued to sing and hold on to these songs and not fight back, not scream, not, you know, they had to hold themselves. And that's what made me think about Jackie Robinson. And the other thing I think that is, we talked about this briefly in terms of the challenge, you know, you don't survive these kinds of challenges without being transformed. And so this Fisk Jubilee Singers start off as young teenagers, very young, formerly enslaved, some of them with some handful of education, some with not very much at all. And by the end of I don't know, they did several tours, but by the time that the tours are over, these are transformed. These young men and women they're young, they're not children anymore. You know, they're not children in terms of the way they see themselves. They're not children in terms of the kind of independence they have in their own lives. They're not children in terms of their demands. There's conflict on the road, and part of it is because they know they have a sense of themselves and a sense of what they deserve and what belongs to them, and they decide, as young men and women, they are not going to relent in terms of what they need, what they feel they need. So, and I was saying earlier, it reminds me a little bit of what happened for African-American soldiers coming back from the wars, where you get away from this oppressive environment where that begins to define you. And once you're out into these other worlds, you have freedom, you have ways of thinking, ways of seeing yourself, ways of understanding And that is a transforming thing. And once that begins to happen, it can't unhappen. It can't unhappen. And so these young men and women, they can't become what they were. They're young men and women who are seeing the world very differently. And it creates conflict within the group. But at the same time, the last thing I would say is I think that you mentioned Ella Shepherd, and she is kind of the linchpin. I mean, in the story, she's probably more, the transformation that happens for her is probably even greater and more particularly more documented. She starts off as sort of a lead, very important talent, and winds up being the person who is holding the group together and running. After George Floyd becomes very ill and can't really hold on to things, she's the person who actually is holding it together. And the strength to do that with a group of, young people traveling in all over the country and other parts of the world, I think is a sort of extraordinary thing. And she was a remarkable artist, a remarkable singer. One of the things, I don't know if you remember, Dr. Kwami, but there was one moment where we were shooting a scene with someone standing in for Ella Shepherd, and we actually had her pitch pipe.
Yeah.
We actually found her actual pitch pipe, and so the actor had the pitch pipe, and that sent chills through me. I have to say, when they gave me the pitch, that just gave me chills. I mean,
I'm glad you did not fall down.
It was pretty amazing. Like, this is it. This is the one this is it. This is her pitch pipe.
Right.
And that's still at Fisk somewhere. But it was wonderful just to be able to, the audience would never know that, but for the actors and for myself to know that, it was just very, very riveting moment.
So these riveting moments, let's go to that and how the singers are transformed. Luke, tell us about the moment at Oberlin, which we're going to watch a clip of that in a second, but tell us a little bit about, this is the moment that transformation begins, when things really seem to take off, when they go from struggling to now all of a sudden their stardom begins and the transformation begins. Say a little bit about that moment.
I'm not as familiar with the film as you are, but there are moments that is a moment that does stay in my head. Funny, it's interesting. It stays in my head visually because they come in, as I understand it, they come in, as I remember the story, they come into Oberlin and they're financially on a bit, they've continued to be desperate, but they've financially just been struggling, and it's sort of like make or break. It's like, either we're going to really capture the audience and we're just going to take charge of the stage, or we're just going to be destined to the rubble pile because we don't, it's that stark. Things have become that desperate. And that is the evening when, and this is of course a largely white audience, a huge cathedral of a church. And it's when they're singing, when they begin to perform those songs, that really kind of, I think what happens is the hearts of the audience become open. They're willing to let their hearts be open, and then they actually get it. And the effect, as they describe it, was just unbelievable. It's written about, there are lots of people writing about it. Newspapers are talking about it, like they've never had an experience like this in a place before. And this happens in a lot of places. My favorite story about this is when they actually, it's not Oberlin, but later on, as things they begin invited to be overseas, they go to Germany and they're singing in Germany. The people in Germany do not understand English and they're blown away. I mean, it's like, they're doing something that sort of is beyond language. And the people in Germany have they're crying, they're weeping, they're just blown, and they don't know what the lyrics are, but they know it's like, the energy and the spiritual power of what they're sharing with them is just overwhelming. So there's no question that they are bringing something into that world of music and performance that nobody has ever experienced or seen.
So let's take a look at the clip at Oberlin College, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
On the 16th of November, the weary singers arrived at Oberlin College in Ohio to sing before a national convention of influential ministers. This time, they reached past cantatas and ballads, back to the secret music they'd sung behind closed doors, the sacred songs of their mothers and fathers.
They started singing "Steal Away." And all of a sudden there was no talking. And then they said just you could hear soft weeping in the faces of the people reading. And I'm sure that the Jubilee Singers were joining them in tears, because sometimes when you think about what you're singing, particularly if you believe it, you can't help but be moved.
After their small triumph at Oberlin, word spread from congregation to congregation. Letters and telegrams flew ahead of them, urging other small-town churches to open their doors. Yet the singers still needed a name. After a night of prayer, George White had an inspiration. "Children," he told the troop, "it shall be Jubilee Singers."
So Oberlin College, I mean, this really begins the turning point. Tell us what it was about the music that they were singing that was so special, and how audiences reacted to that.
Well, let's remember this, that the Fisk Jubilee Singers were out traveling, singing with the purpose of raising funds for the university. And I should also point out that even though they had transformed the Negro spirituals into concert spirituals, they were not willing originally to sing the songs because those songs were very sacred to them. Right. But this particular incident in Oberlin happened because George White had led them there, knowing there were people who would hear the Fisk Jubilee Singers sing and be able to support them by giving funds. It is said that instead of the Fisk Jubilee Singers being placed on a stage in front of the audience, they were placed in a balcony from where they started singing Western classical music. But the audience, that consisted mostly of white people, did not pay any attention to these young students as they sang. People got up and started walking around in the church, talking, which was, again, disrespectful. So the Fisk Jubilee Singers said, if these people will not listen to us as we sing to them, then let us sing our own songs to ourselves. Mm-hmm. So they started singing "Steal Away to Jesus" very quietly. And all of a sudden, there was total silence. People started walking back to their pews, even with tears in their eyes. And that immediately changed everything for the Fisk Jubilee Singers. It is said that after the concert, people gave money, and the news began to spread around the country about these young students from Fisk University and their beautiful and powerful music. And so that really changed, that moment changed things for them.
Yes. So things take off, and I would love to hear from both of you for this question. what do you both believe in your study and experience of Fisk Jubilee Singers? What represents from Oberlin the high point of the group, the sort of culmination, zenith of their success, and then the low point? What are some of the significant hardships, one or two significant hardships? And I'll open that to both of you.
Well, if I may, I would like to actually talk about an incident that happened even before Oberlin College. This was when, shortly after they left Nashville, they got to Chillicothe, Ohio. Having raised very little money, they heard about the notorious Chicago fire, which caused a lot of destruction. Now imagine Black young teenagers from a college going out to raise funds for their university, but hearing about the destruction caused by this Chicago fire, decided to organize a concert. They made the choice to organize a concert, and they raised about $50, and they gave all the $50 to the victims of the Chicago fire. That still blows my mind. That's the best way I can put it. It tells a lot about the kinds of people they were. And of course, another high point after Oberlin is when they got to New York, because the brother of Henry Ward Beecher had heard them sing in Ohio and sent a letter to his brother, who was a very well-known preacher in Brooklyn, New York, had a huge church, and asked his brother to allow the Fisk Jubilee Singers to sing in his church. And so, yes, the Fisk Jubilee Singers were allowed to sing in the Plymouth Congregational Church in Brooklyn. As they finished singing and were walking off stage, Reverend Henry Ward Beecher motioned them back, told them not to leave, but motioned them back to the stage. He got on stage, pulled money out of his pocket, and challenged everyone who was present there that evening to give money to support the Fisk Jubilee Singers. That, I think, was a very high point in that first tour.
I want to add something that the audience, the listeners may not understand about the story about the Chicago fire.
Yeah.
Which is that they were still starving and struggling.
Right.
So this money that they gave to support people who struggled to survive the fire, that could have been money they could have had eaten something with it. It's not like, I'd like to have a good meal. It's like they did not have any food. They were struggling. And when they raised the $50 and they gave it, they said, no, we won't take it. We're going to give it to the people who have survived the fire. So there is a sense of principle and a sense of just mission that is a part of, and a big part of the makeup of the mission is a spiritual one. And I think that's Absolutely. A good example of that. You're talking about low points, and I have to say, for me, I don't know if you can call it the low point, but it's very complex. I don't know if I can describe this briefly, but the Fisk College is depending on the Jubilee Singers to raise money. This is not an ancillary thing. Right. This is becomes the central.
Absolutely.
Exactly, becomes central to their survival. And so they continue to send the singers out. They continue to make long, complex, very challenging schedules for them. And you could even say that they're brutal schedules. And in the film, we describe it. It's very exhausting. People singing until they can't barely talk. People becoming sick. People dying. So it's one of those sort of I don't know how it's one of those moments where you see that the university is trying to do something in a high-minded way, but the consequences for these singers is very, very harsh. And so at the end of the day, to me, that's the thing that begins to tear the group apart. You just can't, you can't push. The students are doing everything they can, and finally it becomes clear they cannot do anymore. They cannot suffer it anymore. They just can't. Actually, when I think about it, it's very emotional when I think about it. These are young people who are doing their best. These young people are being challenged to do what they can to save this institution, one of the most important institutions for Black people at that moment in history. And in the end, they just have to say, we can't do this anymore. As I said, people get sick, people begin to fight, people begin to want to go home, people quarrel. At least one gentleman dies from tuberculosis. It's like it sort of begins to fall apart, and that's some ways the low point. And fortunately, that is not how they are remembered or should be remembered. They made incredible sacrifices as young people to sustain the university.
And so let me jump in. We have one more question before we go to the audience Q&A.
Before we go to the question, just one quick thing, which I think is important, that as they traveled and ran into all these difficult challenges, they kept this in their mind, that the favor of God was with them.
Absolutely. There's a wonderful scene in the documentary about when they're surrounded by some white supremacists who intend to inflict violence upon them, and they keep their faith in God. And I think that theme runs through the documentary. So to pivot from that, so we know that they raised over $100,000 in the 19th century, right, to build Jubilee Hall, which was important for the university's survival, but also for protection. It's a brick building, right, which doesn't burn as easily as white supremacists are going through the country and burning down, right, African-American schools. So we know about what they did for the university. Could we pan out a little bit in our last question before we go to the audience? What do the two of you see as the Fisk Jubilee Singers legacy for what it did for race relations in America?
Dr. Kwami, I would let you take that first.
Oh, wow. Okay. I can very well say that with the power of their music, they were able to quiet people who would normally ridicule them, because wherever they went and people did not think Black people were intelligent or could sing, these Fisk Jubilee Singers simply sung beautiful songs with their beautiful voices. And that's how they won the hearts of people wherever they went. And when I look at things that are happening today, I was recently talking to my students that this music, that is an American form of music, is God-given. If we can focus on this music and study the music and do what the original Fisk Jubilee Singers do, we can sing and express our love through the music, just as the original Fisk Jubilee Singers did. They could have gone on fighting and breaking windows, but they did not do those kinds of things. They simply went on their mission, singing because they wanted to do something good for humanity.
I appreciate that. So let's turn to our audience. And I also will reserve at the end, I want to hear a little bit of personal reflection about what the Fisk Jubilee Singers mean to the two of you personally. But we'll turn to the audience first. We have a question from Diane on YouTube. Shout out to Diane. Are there any recordings of the original singers or early group members?
Unfortunately, we do not have any recordings of the original group. The only thing we have is a book written by one of the original members, Thomas Ratlin, who did not return to the United States, but ended up living the rest of his life in England. He wrote in his book that if his peers, after years of singing, would have heard the way people sang and interpreted the Negro spirituals, his peers wouldn't recognize them. So he transcribed some of the Negro spirituals as they sang them. So that is the closest thing we have on record to what the original group would have sounded like.
Mhm. Thank you for that.
Yes.
And there's subsequent generations of the group who recorded for record labels later on. Is that right?
That is correct. It all started with the Jubilee Quartets when John Webb II became the director of the ensemble. Those were the days when the cylinder recordings were introduced. Yes, so those were the days that the Fisk Jubilee Singers started recording. And we, of course, continue to record these days.
Yes, to much acclaim, you might add. Question 2 to Jen on YouTube. Professor Kwami, the Fisk Jubilee Singers celebrated 150 years of operation this year. Can you talk about how you celebrated and commemorated that moment?
Wow, yes. We planned a year-long celebration. We started with a series of concerts in January of this year. Even during the pandemic, we've had a series of lectures which were named after the founder and first director of the ensemble, George L. White's lecture series. Mm. We've actually also recently had one of the radio stations in Nashville to produce us a beautiful story about the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And then as an educational project, the current Fisk Jubilee Singers collaborated with Tennessee Performing Arts Educational Services. We've produced a film that actually focuses on the life stories of the original Fisk Jubilee Singers. That one is being shown around the country right now on various PBS stations. And then, of course, last week, which was October 6th, we celebrated Jubilee Day with a convocation, and we had Nikki Giovanni as our guest speaker. And there's one official event coming up, which is called Nashville Honors the Fisk Jubilee Singers, the Sesquicentennial Concert. We will be performing at Nashville's Ryman Auditorium on November 11 in celebration of the 150th anniversary. We will also very soon be releasing a book, probably in the spring. It's a commemorative book that talks about the history of the Fisk Jubilee Singers from 1871 to the present. So a lot of things have been going on, in addition to fundraising to support scholarship funds for our Fisk Jubilee Singers.
Absolutely. Max on YouTube, are there standard spirituals or pieces that the original Jubilee Singers performed that are still part of the repertoire today?
I like that question. As musical director of the ensemble currently, one of my goals is to preserve our music, the Negro spirituals. And therefore, we continue to sing the songs that the original Fisk Jubilee Singers sang. The arrangements may be different, but we maintain those same melodies. For example, Steal Away to Jesus, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Go Down Moses, I've Been in the Storm So Long. Yes, we are preserving those melodies. The arrangements may be different, but we have the responsibility, as I said, with other people to preserve our music. So yeah, we do still sing those songs.
Yeah, can I ask a question, Dr. Kwame? How many songs, I realize, how large is the repertoire? How many songs are there that the singers have access to?
We have over 400 songs, some which are still yet to be performed. In fact, as we were preparing for the filming in March, I discovered a spiritual that I had never heard from the book written by Thomas Ratlin. And so there are still a lot of spirituals that we still have not been able to sing yet.
And so that the larger, they haven't been sung. It sounds like we don't even know about them.
It's likely there are some we don't even know about. So we have a lot of work to do still.
That's exciting. That's exciting. So Amanda on Facebook was struck by how much the original Young Singers took on in their mission, as we discussed, representing the school, but also representing Black America more broadly. So can you talk about the pressure the original singers faced and whether that weight of the mission still weighs heavy on the current students who are a part of the Fisk Jubilee Singers today?
It's true that we were not alive when the original Fisk Jubilee Singers traveled, and we know their mission at that time. One interesting thing I want to mention is that before that first tour, even the parents of these young students were not willing to allow their children to go on a tour in those days with a white man. But whatever changed their minds, I do not know. But I believe that as the original Fisk Jubilee Singers traveled, what may have weighed heavily on their minds was to be able to succeed in raising funds to prevent Fisk University from closing. Today, the pressure that is on us, one of the pressures that's on us, is making sure that the younger generation comes to know, accept, and appreciate the Negro spiritual as an American form of music.
Yeah.
So that is why we have to have educational activities in which we expose this music, particularly to young people.
I appreciate that. Suzanne on YouTube, was the tour sanctioned by Fisk University, or did the singers and George White go off on their own?
Well, the administration did not believe that George White would succeed, because who had gone out with a group of 9 young Black students right after slavery, singing to raise money for an institution? Nobody had done that. So when George White came up with this idea, the administration thought this is just an experiment. They did not believe that he would succeed. So they did not support him. But there must have been something special about George White and his wife. They took whatever was left in the coffers of the university plus their own money to fund this tour. And I'm really very glad that we still talk about them today.
Absolutely. Mary on YouTube wants to know, are there descendants of the early singers who are active today with Fisk today?
Yes. Well, I do not have anyone in the ensemble currently, but we do have descendants of the original Fisk Jubilee Singers in the Nashville area. One of them passed away probably 5-6 years ago. She worked in our library, Beth Madison House. She was a great granddaughter of Ella Shepherd. But they do have descendants that still attend our Jubilee Day events these days.
Wonderful. Tonisha, I hope I'm saying that right, on Facebook. She wants to know a little bit more about the performance for Queen Victoria that's pictured in the film. And is it true that she donated £50,000 to the Fisk Jubilee Singers after their performance there?
Lou, do you have a comment on that?
I don't remember. I don't know if it's believable that she could have donated that much money. I don't remember if we covered or researched that at all. But I do remember that it was the first time that anyone, that any group of Black performers or Black young people performed for the Queen, and I think she was as astonished and taken with their performance as everybody else had been. And again, this is, I would imagine that she and her court, if you will, had the same sense and expectation, the same bigotries as many other people, but word had come to her of these young people and what they were doing. And so, it made sense, I think, from her point of view, to have them come in. And one thing, come in and perform for her. And one thing I would just add to what Dr. Kwami is saying in terms of the earlier question about the pressures and the difficulties, I mean, if you can imagine many of these young people, you know, if you had never even traveled more than a mile beyond where they lived and where they were.
Right.
I mean, that was not uncommon, you know, that people just didn't go very far for lots of different reasons. So imagine now you're taking young people into across the country. I've never seen more than a few miles away from where I live to. I'm going across the country. I'm going onto the other side of the world.
Right.
I think that's just an extraordinary thing to imagine young people taking that on and performing with such dignity and to be so successful. I think that's just, especially in that time, you know, especially in that time.
Absolutely. Robert on YouTube wants to know, what do the Fisk Jubilee Singers mean to you, and why do you think they've lasted this long?
Well, best that I came to Fisk as a student in 1983 from Ghana. Before coming to the United States, I knew the name Jubilee Singers, but not Fisk Jubilee Singers. While growing up in Ghana, I sang Negro spirituals in schools, played arrangements of the piano, but also when I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, my father took me to a concert. The performers were Americans who had come to a very remote part of Ghana. I sat on the floor in front of my father to listen to the concert. Interestingly, the only song I remember up to this day from that concert is, "Every time I feel the spirit move in my heart, I will pray," a Negro spiritual. Then, of course, becoming a member of the ensemble gave me the opportunity to learn about the stories of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, their tours, how they traveled to save Fisk University from closing. And I therefore put myself in a position to be one of those who would carry on that legacy. And then, of course, becoming the musical director has given me the opportunity, first of all, to help educate young people to know the value of Negro spirituals, but also to learn about humans, about the quality of the lives of those original singers who sacrificed the education that we would have the opportunity to gain education today. So it's a very humbling position, and I personally don't take it lightly, because I also see it as a mission to serve God.
Beautiful. Lou, you want to jump in really quickly? We've got 2 more questions after this.
You know, my connection to the singers is really through the music. You know, my mother was the church mother of the church that I grew up in as a kid, and the music to me there was always very powerful and just, you know, affecting for me. It was the only thing I wanted to be. I didn't really care for the preaching. I just wanted to be there for the music. But it, you know, it was "I'll Fly Away" was the song that always struck me. I mean, and whenever that song came on, there's a number, but that was sort of the song that would just sit me down and ground me, even as a kid. And so later, I'd done a lot of research in terms of history and looking at African American culture, and I knew something about the Jubilee Singers, and as a part of the whole weave of things that helped me understand what was happening at the end of the Civil War, but had never really studied what actually happened and who they were. And so when the opportunity came to sort of explore that. It was like sort of really being, it was like really being thrown into the music all over again. But this time, now I was a little bit older with a lot more curiosity and a lot more sense of what they were up against, what they were accomplishing, what it really meant, and that they had actually, in their own right, really preserved this music and sort of in an amazing way, taken it from where it existed, as I said, the music that was created by, created in the fields and in many other places, and sort of found a way to preserve it without writing, by just simply the genius of their art. And it's kind of an amazing thing when you think about it. And I'm intrigued, and the last thing I said, I'm intrigued by what Dr. Kwami said about Rutland saying that he had transcribed this music, and that folks would not, that the people, his peers would not recognize what they were singing, but he tried to transcribe. I would love to see or hear how that sounded, because I've thought about that a lot, because it's not, it's beautiful and it's extraordinary music, but it's not the way it would have been sung and the way it was invented. And I've always wondered how close we could get to that.
You know, that's a great point, and that for both of you, the music has been both what drew you to it, and it sounds like what you both see is what has helped the Fisk Jubilee Singers endure. It's just their performance of this music. So, the last question, then we'll sign off. Professor Kwami, Babs on YouTube wants to know about the types of accompaniment the original singers performed with, and then Lou, for you, finally, John on YouTube wants to know, since there's no original recordings of the original singers, but it was important for you to have the music in the film, how did you do that? So those are our final two questions, and we've got 4 minutes.
All right. Okay, I'll go first. Whenever the original Fisk Jubilee Singers had to sing, the pitch was given using a pitch pipe or sometimes violin, because George White had a violin. But in many cases, their performances were a cappella. They did have an opportunity during their first tour when they were in Boston and were invited to sing at a festival. There was a very large orchestra. And the song they sang was, I've forgotten the title, but they sang this song. 9 of them sang way above the sound of the orchestra. But generally, their music was a cappella. And even today, when we sing, it's mostly a cappella. There are a few occasions if we have to sing with guest artists in concerts, then we would use various types of instrumental accompaniment.
Okay, Lou, you've got a minute and 30 seconds.
One of the things that was really terrific about, there weren't original recordings, as you noted, but one of the things that was terrific about the production of the film was that I got to choose the music. So I had to choose, here are the songs, here are the pieces, and so as I remember, the music is a combination of performances that were actually done, that were arranged by Dr. Kwami, and some of those you see we filmed live. You know, the Jubilee Singers are in costume, and we filmed them and using that music and recording it as well. And some of them, I believe, are performances that were directed by Dr. John Wesley. Is that right? I believe yes. Okay. So it's a combination of music from both of those sources, and it was we listened to quite a bit of music, and frankly, it was really just the music that either had a specific historical meaning in a particular scene or moment, or the music that I loved. So.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you both. I could talk to you all forever, but I really appreciate you allowing me to be part of this conversation. So thank you to Professor Kwami and Lou for joining us today. And now I'm going to turn to Cameo George with closing remarks. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today for this celebration of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, past and present. Jubilee Singers, Sacrifice and Glory is now available to stream in full on our website and in the PBS video app. You can watch our past forward conversations anytime on our YouTube channel or on our website, americanexperience.org. If you liked what you saw today, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for our events newsletter. You'll be the first to know about new conversations, including our next one examining the experience of Black veterans in America. Thank you again. Have a great night.